right, let's jump into the text. Esther 1:1. Now in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia. Now think about that. From India, right, all the way to Ethiopia. This guy has a massive empire, and he is massively powerful. In the days of Ahasuerus, who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces, in those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, the citadel, in the 3rd year of his reign. Ahasuerus, a.k.a. Xerxes, reigned from 486 to 465 B.C. So the 3rd year of his reign would put us in 483 B.C. One of the things that you will note as you go across the book of Esther is that by the time you get to chapter 3, verse 7, you're to the 12th year of King Ahasuerus. And that the 12th year of his reign would be 474 BC. So almost 10 years pass between Esther 1 and Esther chapter 3. So we're getting a compressed account of these events. So 1:3. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for all his officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the provinces were before him. So this is a massive celebration. Dignitaries of the entire empire have descended upon the capital. And we read in verse 4, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. A 6-month party is what we're dealing with. This is a huge feast and celebration of the empire and of the emperor, Ahasuerus. 6 months this goes on. And when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So they're going to conclude with this 7-day bash. And then the author of the book of Esther elaborates on the glory of this. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rods and marble pillars and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Now, I just want to make an observation here that the author of Esther is a man who has a vocabulary who can describe these things. The author of Esther can look, I can't tell you what those curtains are made of. And I can't tell you, this is probably luxury vinyl tile, right? This is a guy who knows things. This guy writing these things, he's someone who can look at materials and tell you what blends you've got working. He can look at artwork and tell you that that's a mosaic, and he can tell you what those rocks in the mosaic are. This is an intelligent man. Verse 7, drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. And drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion. If you want to drink, drink. If you don't want to, that's okay. For the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. The author wants us to look at this and think, wow, this guy has everything he could possibly want. This guy is phenomenally powerful. Now, why would he want us to think that? I think he would want us to think that because he intends to show that even the most powerful potentate in the world cannot compel the human heart. And even the most massively significant and wealthy emperor on planet Earth cannot overcome the curses that God introduced, particularly here in Genesis 3:16. That's what we see next. Verse 10. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zathar, and Carcas, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. Okay, so a couple of things to note. Note that he sends eunuchs. This is a guy who has a preserve of women, as we're going to read. And in order to ensure that his preserve of women is not infringed upon by other males, he emasculates other males who are in his service. And there is nothing that they can do about it. When the king decides you are going to be a eunuch, you've got no recourse. There's no court that you can appeal to. There's no law on the books that this is cruel and unusual. There is no broader sort of mindset in the culture that the king doesn't have the right to take away the masculinity of these men. This guy does whatever he wants. Now, with Queen Vashti, we don't know exactly what she's being demanded to do. Some people make suggestions that I think are outlandish. But one way or another, she's being treated like an object of adornment. She is being treated here as though her beauty is about the king's magnificence. The king is manifestly showing off. And now the way that he's decided to show off is to bring his beautiful queen out and strut her before the audience so that everyone will ooh and ah and envy the glory of the king. Look at verse 12. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. She's having none of it. And what we see here is that this king, for all his power, for all his wealth, for all his army, he cannot escape. Genesis 3:16, your desire will be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. That's what we're about to see worked out right here. Vashti wants to be in control, at least of her own, where she goes, where she comes. And Ahasuerus is going to rule over her in the sense that he is going to respond with a stupid excess of insistence on his own authority and power. So look at verse 12 there. At this, the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. And in verse 13, the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in law and judgment, the men next to him being Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan. Another note, whoever this author is, he knows the names of the eunuchs and of these guys around the king, right? This guy has done his homework, and probably this author is going to be a highly placed official with access to royal records to be able to verify, we're dealing with a book that's going to cover a span of at least 10 years, and this guy has verified, all right, we're in the third year. He knows how long the party lasted. He knows how the party was decked out. He knows which eunuchs were sent to Vashti. He knows everything that's happened. And probably, given the nature of this, just this morning in the paper, there was an article about how the Russians are trying to clean up the PR for Ivan the Terrible. And they're just overtly saying, what they're trying to do is promote Russian nationalism, and so they're just overtly saying, Ivan the Terrible needs some new PR. And this whole thing about him being the terrible, this is part of the information war of the West on Russia. And then, recently they took one of the gulags, and there was in Russia, basically a Russian concentration camp, and they expunged it, and they reformulated the message that's communicated by that gulag. In other words, it's not about anymore the Russian government's cruelty to its own citizens. Now it's about something like the faithfulness and the duty of the guards who served there. That's what's now commemorated at that gulag. So they're rewriting history is what I'm after. They're rewriting history to try to make themselves look better. The person writing this account is going to have the ability to get behind any attempt to expunge things that the king would rather forget, which would include things like Vashti's refusal to obey him. Now, I don't know who this might have been. Maybe it was Mordecai. He seems like a likely candidate to me, but we don't know who wrote this. We continue here in verse 14. The 7 princes of Persia and Media who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom. According to the law, the king asks, what is to be done to Queen Vashti because she has not performed the commandment of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs? Then Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials. Now what we see here is that all humans everywhere are facing Genesis 3:16. And look at the world. This is the way it is the world over. All humans everywhere deal with the relational difficulties prompted by those words of judgment. Your desire will be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. There is nobody on planet Earth who doesn't have to deal with that. All the difficulty between men and women, particularly between husbands and wives, but it extends broader than that, everywhere stems from the sin in the garden and the word of judgment in Genesis 3:16. And that works right here too. Look at what this guy says. Verse 16, Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials, not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt. Since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. Now, what he's right about is that all women are going to deal with this. What he's wrong about is that it stems from Queen Vashti. It's not her fault that the women are going to want to respond this way. It's the fault of the sinners in the garden, and it flows out of God's word of judgment. Verse 18, this very day the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will say the same to all the king's officials. In other words, they'll say, I'm not coming. And there will be contempt and wrath in plenty. If it please the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes. And here we hear a little bit of their, there's this great line in Hamlet, when Hamlet's mother is protesting of her fidelity and loyalty to her previous husband, whom she had basically forgotten after less than a month and remarried his brother, which is sort of shocking in any situation. She's protesting about how she wasn't aware of all this, and somebody says, the lady doth protest too much, methinks. In other words, that excessive protestation betrays that you really don't believe what you're saying. And every time you read about the laws of the Medes and the Persians in the Bible, they add, which cannot be changed, which cannot be altered. And what's interesting about this is that these are often new laws, which cannot be altered, right? So the laws are being altered with the addition of this law, and then they're trying to give it this absolute status by adding this phrase, which cannot be altered. And it's just self-defeating. So let it be written among the laws of the Medes and the Persians, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. You know what that is? That's foolish. That's excessive. That's dumb. And what it shows is the futility of the king's way of trying to compel people. If this king were wise, what he would do is respond in humility to Vashti. What he would do is try to win her heart. He would try to reach out to her and try to communicate to her her significance, try to communicate to her that she is free, and that what will make him look good as a king is to have a wife who freely chooses to please him and freely chooses to make him look good. If he were wise, that's what he would do. But he's not wise. He's a fool. And so he decides, she won't come, then she'll never come before me again. Well, now who does that hurt? The king, right? I mean, who suffers from that really? The king does. He just looks like a fool. Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. We're going to see the sense in which Esther is better than Vashti. And I think it's a sense that is resonant with broader biblical themes. So when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, for it is vast, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. This advice pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in his own script, and to every people in its own language, that every man be master in his own household and speak according to the language of his people. Well, they can issue an edict like that, and it's not going to change women's hearts, is it? They can issue an edict like that, and it's not going to make it where women are all of a sudden like, oh, okay, whatever you say, I'll be your doormat. Nope, not going to happen. That's not the way the world works. After these things, chapter 2, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. And the king's young men who attended him said, now listen to this proposal. This is shocking in its brutality. Don't let your familiarity with the Bible numb you to an emotional response to this. When you read this, you should be appalled, not at God, right, but at the wickedness of these people. You should be appalled that anybody would do this. The king's young men who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the citadel, under the custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Do you understand what this means? This means that if you are a father in Persia, it's dangerous to have a beautiful daughter that you care about. It's dangerous if you're a young man in Persia and you're, let's say, in love with a young woman that maybe you're about to be engaged to. Do you understand what this means if you're a young woman in Persia who's cursed with beauty? It means that they're about to come and collect you. And then they're going to put you in the harem where you are going to be used. Maybe one night by the king. And then if you fail to be pleasing to the king is going to decide that you are now a gift that he is going to do with as he pleases. So maybe he's got a general that he appreciates. He's going to give you to him. And you got no say. You got no recourse. Who's going to defend you? The police? Well, the police are the ones that came and collected you. The police are the ones that are going to ensure that you get handed over to the general. Who's going to decide in your favor? The judges? Well, the judges are the ones who the king might decide, well, I used that girl, and I'm done with her now because she wasn't pleasing, so I'm going to give her to that judge. So the judge is going to rule in your favor? Not likely. Not in this world. And let's say you're a father and you don't want this to happen to your daughter. What are you going to do? Here comes the army. So all these ladies are to be brought to the custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given them, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This pleased the king. Well, this guy is obviously operating out of his flesh, isn't he? I mean, we understand why this would please the king. He's about to have just a bevy of the loveliest ladies from the land. And he's going to do with them as he pleases. And then he's going to pick the one that he likes best. And that's the way it's going to go. And there's nothing that they can do to stop it. This is not the world you want to live in, right? Especially if you happen to be a young lady who is cursed with beauty. So the first thing I think that people need to recognize about the book of Esther is that this is not a situation in which Esther has a choice. The text is going to tell us that Esther was taken. So contemplate what's going to happen if she tries to pull a Daniel in that situation. So, I mean, this is one of the things that people criticize Esther about. If Esther decides, no, I'm not going to eat the king's meat. I'm not going to drink the king's wine. I want to be preserving my Levitical purity. And so these soldiers show up, and they see that she's beautiful, and they say, all right, you're coming with us, you're going to the king's harem. And she says, no, I'm a Jew. What are they going to do? oh, okay, we didn't realize that. We'll respect your religious freedom. No, that's not the way the thing works. What they're going to do is they're going to say to her, probably, lady, you can either come peaceably, or we can just expunge from the record that there was a beautiful young lady, and before we do that, we're going to do with you as we please. And then we might leave you dead, or we might just take you with us, and you'll be the property of this regiment, and we will use you as we like. I mean, those are Esther's choices, probably. Her choices probably are submit and go and be put in the king's harem, or be gang raped and killed, or be gang raped and then taken with these guys to be gang raped at their pleasure. That's what she's looking at. So no, I don't think anybody in the modern West has any right to criticize Esther for the choice that she had to make. I submit to you that Esther is making the best of a really bad situation. And for some sanctimonious white guy in this world to say, oh, she's compromised to the Persian world. Please, what would you have done in that situation? I mean, I just don't think we're in any position. I think she's, and I think there's another way to look at her actions. So look at chapter 2, verse 5 and following. Now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite. This is really significant because do you remember who else was a son of Kish? A Benjaminite. That's right, Saul. So this guy descends from Saul. And another significant point of contact here is that in 1 Samuel 15, I believe it is, Samuel sent Saul against King Agag. And we're going to read later in the book of Esther that Haman is an Agagite. And so what we're getting here in the book of Esther is a conflict between, in a sense, the house of Saul, members of the house of Saul that are going to be faithful to the Torah, and an enemy that Saul should have dealt with and didn't. Saul was supposed to put them under the ban, and he didn't. And the descendants of those whom Saul was supposed to put under the ban are now, seed of the serpent, trying to stamp out the seed of the woman. And in this narrative, the seed of the woman prevails over the descendants of the seed of the serpent. Son of Kish, a Benjaminite, verse 6, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. Now this is really poignant, I think. Here you're dealing with an orphan girl whose uncle loves her. And we read here, the young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. This is not merely telling us about Esther's physical appearance. It's also linking her with other biblical characters who were attractive in form and appearance, one of whom was Joseph. And we read about Joseph, a similar description, and Joseph finds himself taken into captivity, and then from prison he rises to the right hand of Pharaoh. Esther is going to be a Jew in a foreign land who's taken into captivity and then rises to the right hand of the king. And Joseph works deliverance for his brothers. Esther is going to work deliverance for her people. A lot of parallels between Joseph and Esther. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa the citadel in custody of Hegai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody. Did you see that? Esther also was taken. I mean, maybe she tried to escape. We don't know. We don't know, but she was taken. So again, I just think it's totally illegitimate to criticize her as though she's being somehow conformed to the world or assimilated into Persia or anything like that. She's living in a brutal and vicious empire, and she's put in a really bad situation. Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor. Now, how would a young woman do that? I submit to you that that what we're about to read about Esther shows us that she's a woman of character. And she's a woman of character who is resisting what the curse of Genesis 3:16 would cause her to want to do under the impulse that a woman is going to feel to take charge of situations. I think that's the way that Esther is being presented to us. The young woman pleased him and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with her cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. You could potentially look at this as though Esther is being presented kind of along the lines of Daniel, as though she is being shown to be someone who is like Daniel, finding favor in the eyes of her captors. Verse 10, Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. This is not necessarily a bad indication. I think one thing you see here is Esther's submission to authority. Mordecai is her father figure. He tells her how to act, and she says, okay, I'm not going to be impulsive. I'm not going to be the one who's trying to set the agenda. You're telling me what to do. You've got a strategy here. You think this is wise. We'll do that. I'll take your advice. So what I'm suggesting is that we see in Esther a woman who, though she may feel the impulse from Genesis 3:16, she's rejecting that impulse, and she's embracing the authority of her father figure, Mordecai. Verse 11, every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. So he's checking on her. He's making sure she's okay. Verse 12, now when the turn came for each young woman to go in to King Ahasuerus after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with spices and ointments for women. When the young woman went in to the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem in the custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go in to the king again unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now think about that. You're in this situation. How are you going to respond to this situation if you're Esther? Esther's response to this situation is to say, I'm about to be made, essentially, one of the wives of the king. I can reject the lot that I've been given. I can pitch a fit. I can be cantankerous, and my fate will be like Vashti's or worse. And after the king's done with me, he'll put me in this pool of ladies that he's going to use however he wants to use them, maybe give me to a foreign dignitary, do whatever he wants to do. That's one route I could take. So I could let Genesis 3:16 have free reign in my heart. Or I could say, if I become the king's favored wife, if I become the king's queen, maybe I could use the position for good. Maybe I could make the best of this. Maybe God could use me. Now, there may be indications that Esther has to be sort of encouraged to see it that way in the words that Mordecai says to her. But I think what we definitely see from Esther is a submission to Mordecai's authority. And then when it comes time to be taken in before the king, her attitude is not, I'm going to do whatever I want when I go in there. Or I'm going to do what I see fit when I go in there. Her attitude is to go to that eunuch and say, what do you think I should do? And then, again, she submits to the guidance of the eunuch. She takes his advice. And